Welcome, everyone. If you want, you are welcome to turn on your video. Otherwise, don't feel like you have to. Welcome to our lightning talk today. I'm going to quickly go over a couple things. This group, the high school to college interest group, started this lightning talk concept, and this is our fourth one. Well, anyway, and our next meeting is next April. April the 25th is the next lightning talk. Before that, though, we have our educators lab. It's on March 26th, and then it'll be at the Jefferson Community College, their library. If you have any questions, you can always email me, Christy@nnyln.org. And now I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, and she's going to do a quick intro and then get on with our topic.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming in today, which is not really a thing because it's online, but I don't do this very much. So my name is Stephanie Pritchard, and I'm a faculty member at SUNY Oswego, and I teach in the English and Creative Writing department here. I mostly teach writing classes, so I teach creative writing, I teach introductory and intermediate poetry writing, I teach a digital storytelling class, and I also teach English composition. And so the project that I'm going to spend some time talking with you about today is a project that I do in my English composition course. I've been doing it for a couple of semesters now, and it seems to be pretty successful. One of the things that I notice is that in English composition, the students are required to do a research paper. So as I've taught English composition over the past several years, I've noticed that, if you tell students that they have to do a research paper, when you leave it wide open, they tend to either go for the easy things to write about, right? Like if you tell them they have to write like an argumentative style thing, they end up going for, the hot button issues that they always go for, right? They'll talk about gun control, they'll talk about legalizing marijuana, they'll talk about all those sorts of things. So with this, I kind of wanted to push them outside of that comfort zone a little bit, and also try to avoid the phenomenon that happens with a lot of writers where they wait to do a project until like 2 days or the day before it's due, and then they turn the whole thing in, and it's kind of like disastrous. So this is something that I found a little while ago. And I decided to, instead of telling students like, hey, we're going to write a research paper, pick a topic and go, I decided to make the whole thing like a project-based kind of idea. So this research paper actually takes about 7 weeks to do from start to finish. So it's a big project, right? And it's 7 weeks long. It's got 6 different assignments that stretch over the 7-week period. So it really forces students to kind of like take things one step at a time. And it also forces students to kind of work on meeting all of those deadlines that happen throughout the whole thing, right? And I try to do like different weights to each of the different assignments to try to make the grading as fair as possible. So what I'm going to do is kind of show you guys today the first 2 steps to the project and talk about them. And I'll do like kind of a general overview of the rest of it if I have time to, but I'll show you my assignment sheet so that you can kind of see what I do and how I'm trying to implement this project. Because I work, like in English composition especially, you get lots of freshmen. So because I work with freshmen, that's one of the reasons I decided to kind of go about this assignment this way, so that they can really try to learn how they could structure things for other writing assignments that they're going to have in classes like on down the road. So I'm going to show you the assignment sheet for the whole thing. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. So here's what we're looking at. Like I said, there's 6 parts total. So for this assignment, I tried to have it kind of structured, right? So instead of letting them choose anything, I tried to kind of like, rein it in a little bit, but still give them lots of freedom, like lots of options for them to work with. So this is just part one. So I call this the metacognitive part of the whole thing. So basically, like, I like to start here because it lets students kind of realize what they already know and then work from there. So you'll see that, like, what I'm asking them to do is to choose a fictional character. This character can be from TV series, from a book that they really like, or a movie. Now that it's so easy for us to stream basically anything, like a lot of students really love watching Netflix or Hulu. They have all these shows that they like to watch and follow. So this assignment works really well because they have no trouble picking something. It's very easy for them to be like, oh yeah, like, I really like Lost, or I really like Dexter, or I really like Sons of Anarchy, right? Like, they have no trouble kind of like choosing, a genre to kind of pick and write about. So because this is metacognitive, I explain to them what that word means and tell them that, this whole assignment, like this whole part one, is based on information that they already know. This is information that they already have in their brains. So it's their job to just kind of like take that brain information and put it on the page. And that's all that they're responsible for doing. So I tell them that it's super important for them to not do research, for them to not use or cite any sources, for them to not directly quote whatsoever, and to not like worry too much about being really accurate. I tell them, if you can't remember, like the company that your character works at, don't worry about it, right? Like, either leave that out or make something up and you can come back and fix it later. Don't worry too much about how accurate you are at this point. The whole point of this is to just get your knowledge out onto the page so that you can see what you know and see what you have to work with. So that's kind of like what the next paragraph spends time talking about. So then I tell them, I give them a couple of guided questions that they can think about, but I tell them in class that they don't need to answer the questions that I've laid out for them. Like, if they want to talk about other stuff, then that's fine. Those are mostly questions for them to just like kind of get started and to, like get them thinking and get them writing. So I tell them, like, it's up to you if you use these questions to help you. However, you need to think about and answer one question, which is down here at the bottom. If you had to prove or claim something about your character, what would it be and why? And that's the big thing that I want them to really start thinking about at an early stage before we move forward. So part one is it's quite straightforward and it's really short. It's 2 to 3 double-spaced pages. The funny thing about part one is that I get lots of emails and questions from students saying, well, I have more than 3 pages of stuff to say about this person, right? Like, can I say more? Can I write more? And I think that's so interesting because that's not usually like a problem that I have in class, right? Usually it's, well, I have, I have 1 page. Are you sure? Like, do you really need to? Like, are you sure you need to? So I really love that, like, they latch onto this idea of that they know something and that they know something like right off the bat. They find that really, really important. And so I really like that about this. So this is the first piece that's due. Along with this piece, I give them kind of like and we have like a course outline that shows them the due dates for all of the major pieces of everything that we do in class. But I also give them kind of like the breakdown of what everything looks like for the whole project. So I'll show you that also. So you see that there are 6 pieces total, right? And most of them are like 10 or 15% of their overall grade. So it's not totally low stakes assignments, but low enough, right? Where if they like totally bomb one part, it's not going to make or break their whole grade. It's also worth mentioning that I offer like revision opportunities for most of the different components of this project because it's a writing course. I have time to do that. I understand that in other courses, like where content is the bigger focus, you might not have time to do that. But here it works really well because I'm trying to teach them how to go about like revising and composing a paper of their own. So they have their metacognitive piece. Then they do a draft of their second part, which is what I'm going to talk about next. The second part is more complicated. So they have some more wiggle room with it. So they have a draft of it, and then they actually do a class workshop of their draft so that they can get feedback from each other, which is good practice, especially since we're talking about sources. What makes a good source? What makes a not so good source? You know, like, is this ultimately going to help or hurt you in the long run as you keep going? And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. So, you know, they kind of have like a first go at it and then feedback from their peers, and then the final, which is what they submit to me for a grade. So that's kind of staggered a little bit, and you can see the due dates are staggered also. Part 3 is a full sentence outline of the whole paper. Part 4 is a draft of their essay, and then they are going to do a different kind of in-class workshop on that draft to get more feedback from each other. But this workshop, the questions that I ask them are different from the workshop that we do for part 2. So it gives them kind of like multiple opportunities to be exposed to workshop experiences that have different expectations, which is really nice. Then part 5 is their whole essay that's totally complete. And then I make them write a very short, like reflective essay about this whole kind of like segmented scaffolded experience that they turn in at the end of the semester too. So that's kind of part 1 and like the general overview that they get for the whole thing. So then if we go to the second part, this is what asks them to find sources for their project. So like I mentioned just a moment ago, they have a draft, but they also have a final. So they turn in the metacognitive piece and they get my feedback on the metacognitive part. And then that's when they start really like thinking about what they're going to do beyond this, right? Like they've got their own knowledge and now they need to figure out how they're going to make it more substantial. So they have their character, they have what they know about their character, and the next piece is them finding sources that can build on the information that they've already done. This is what I really like about part 2, is that typically when students do research, they go find sources first, and then they use those sources to kind of like make their argument, right? So they're looking at what everybody else is already saying, and then they're putting that into their own paper. Because of the way this is kind of structured, they're forced to make their own claims first and then go find sources that help support the claims that they've already made, which shows them that like their own knowledge is valuable, right? And really important. So that's one of the reasons I like this so much. So I have them follow these questions just like this, right? Like part 2 is not, they don't write an essay. It's just kind of like them answering these different questions that I've laid out for them. So they have to find a source that supports a point they made in their original essay and explain to me how the source supports their point. They have to choose a source that adds a new piece of information to their essay and explain how the new information would affect their original work. Choose one source that reveals an inaccuracy in their essay or challenges their point of view. This is the hard one for them. They have the most difficulty finding this one because it forces them to kind of think outside the box a bit more. And then choose a quote from a source that would enhance their essay. Typically, the last one is the easiest because I tell them that it's okay if they choose a quote directly from the show, the book, the movie. You know what I mean? That's really quite straightforward. Usually it's something that their own character would say. So that's something that they can kind of like use in their essay, and then that leads into a nice conversation about directly quoting and how that can be helpful. So after they list and talk about their sources, they include their working thesis statement. And I ask them to have 4 sources total. So the challenging thing about this, right, is that they're picking characters to research. And a lot of the characters that they choose aren't easily Googleable, right? So like the example that I use in class is Dr. House, because I think that he's a very dynamic character. But if you Google House, the television show, you'll find all kinds of information about him. but all that information isn't necessarily considered reliable or scholarly, right? It's largely like opinions, blogs, stuff like that. So instead of studying the actual character of House, they need to study like what makes him who he is. So like if any of you have seen the TV show, you'll know that like Dr. House is kind of like an unkempt, like drug addicted doctor who is like very like rude and straightforward with his patients. So like if I were writing this paper, I would be proving that like Dr. House's addiction to his drug medication is like hindering him in his work, like in his work life or something like that. So you have to really find something about the character to talk about, not just search for the character, because a lot of these characters that these kids are picking aren't easily, they're not easily found in different places. You need to learn what makes the character the way they are and then kind of use that as a follow-up. So this is why part 2 works really, really well, because they're kind of forced to make observations about their character and then see what kind of good research they can find to help support or negate the points that they're making. So I think I've talked for about 15 minutes. So come back. Does anybody have any questions about anything that I said? I know I had to go through part 2 a little bit fast, so I'm happy to clarify if anything seemed confusing.
Hi, this is Michelle Bishop. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hi, Michelle.
Hi, well, thank you for your presentation. And I actually will be working with you in your classes in the next month, April, right? So we will be working on this same assignment together.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. Thank you so much for helping me with this.
Yeah, I'm excited to actually teach it. Well, teach along with you. So I was just wondering, in the first part where you offer them guided questions, do you find that they generally use the questions that you've put together, or do they generally use their own questions?
That's a really good question. It's probably 50-50.
Okay.
A lot of them will usually choose, like the vast majority of them will not answer all of the questions.
Mm-hmm.
They'll answer maybe like 2 or 3. Because it depends on how many examples they feel like they need to use from their source to kind of explain the points that they're making. So, it's probably split in half.
Okay. And then the section you just talked about where they have to find something about the character,
Mm-hmm.
do you have questions to help them get to that point? Because I have a sense that, like you were saying, they focus more on the actual character and not the qualities of the character.
Yeah, that is like 100% the most challenging part of doing this assignment. Because they'll say, like for example, like if their character is Dr. House, right? They'll go to like our library's website and they'll type in the information. They'll just type in house, right? And that in itself is problematic, right? Because his house is also the name of a noun. But, and then they'll say like, well, Stephanie, we can't find anything. The reason that I have them, like, so we watch an episode of House in class, and then spend the whole following class period talking about the episode. And I try really hard in that class period to work with them to see House almost like a person, right? And we spend time kind of like picking apart like the different observations that they've made about him. And I really stress to them in class too that like when they're thinking about their own characters, to not think about their characters as people who are fictional, to think about their characters as real people who have real problems. So, like I had one student who chose a character from a Netflix show that's called Peaky Blinders. And of course, like if you search for this guy, you don't find anything about him. But he was like a mobster in England, like back in the 1920s. So like that alone, right? Like that kind of like setting, I think is really, really interesting. And he also had, like he like owned some gambling businesses. He was an alcoholic. He was a womanizer, so like all of these qualities that make up humans, right? That are all like problematic usually like in our society and, not necessarily today, all of them, right? But that are problems, that are still going on. Like there's research on all of those sorts of things. So I try really hard to stress to my students that it's important to think about their characters like they're real. And that usually kind of helps them start to understand where I want them to go with this.
Yeah, I find because I work a lot with first year students also, I find that the guiding questions really are really helpful in getting them to think deeply and giving them focus as to what it is that we want them to really pay attention to as they're doing research or in your case writing. So I think it's great that you have questions built into this process too to help guide them.
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring that up because it's such a fine line. Because I find that if I give them too many questions, it creates a very safe space for them, and then they never go outside the questions that I ask, right? Because it's like, oh well, I can just follow what she wants me to do. And I mean, I think that that's good that they can follow directions and that they can answer the questions I've already laid out. But the whole point of this is to try to get them to think for themselves, right? And to think outside the box a little bit. So that's why I omitted the guiding questions on part 2 because I wanted to try to push them a little bit, and they struggle with part 2. It's the hardest part of the whole project for them. That's the feedback that I've gotten consistently semester after semester. But I mean, I think that's why I broke it up into multiple sections and gave them more time with it because it's something they really struggle with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
So I like the part where you have them reflecting at the end. I really do. This is Karen, by the way.
Hi, Karen.
Hi. I really think that's important for them to think about their own thinking. So I don't think they do that enough.
Yeah, I have the assignment sheet for the reflection that I can throw up on the screen.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, it's like very basic, but just so that you can kind of see. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is the last part, and I basically just asked them. It's short, but I asked them to kind of think about, like how much knowledge do you think you had about your character at the beginning? Did you feel comfortable writing about it, like without doing any extra research? What did you learn or decide to learn about your character? So for most of the students, this is the part that's most fascinating for me, right?
Yes.
Because you can say to them, hey, pick a character from a show, and they'll be like, oh, I really like the show. But then, if you ask them to tell you why they like the show or the character, they struggle with that a little bit more. They're just like, oh, it's really good, but they can't give you extra feedback about that. So
why is it good?
yeah. Why do you like this person? And for several of them too, I remember last semester, I had a student who wanted to do Hermione Granger from the Harry Potter books. Yeah, which you might remember. Yeah. And she was really determined to prove that Hermione Granger was a really wonderful character and that she was a strong female character and everything else. And I mean, I agree that Hermione is to some extent, absolutely. But as my students started to do more and more research and with the knowledge she already had about Hermione, she ended up learning that and ultimately ended up proving that, unfortunately, in her opinion, Hermione turned into more of a mother figure to the other characters in the books and seemed more like a supporting female role instead of a lead. You know what I mean? And she found evidence from the books to support her theory about how Hermione was always kind of looking after Harry and Ron, and Hermione was always helping Harry and Ron. And I thought that was really fascinating. So in her reflection, she wrote about how sad she was to have learned.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
That this character that she was so determined to prove this one thing about she ended up finding more evidence to the contrary. And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
So, and then I asked them if they like the structure of this. And most of them, I tell them, I'm not grading you based on your answers. I'm grading you based on how you answer, right? So for like the third bullet, did you prefer or dislike receiving this assignment in any way? You know, I'm like, I don't care. If you hated it, like, please tell me that you hated it, but you need to tell me why you hated it, right?
Yes.
Like that's, you know, that's what I'm interested in. Probably 90% of the students say that they like the segments because and like, I think honestly, the only reason they like it so much is because it doesn't let them procrastinate until the night before the thing is due.
Absolutely.
So they seem to really and they like also that like all of the different pieces of this assignment build on each other, right? So they can literally take, as they're writing their essay, their final essay, they can copy and paste sections from their metacognitive essay into their final essay. They can copy and paste sections of their outline into their final essay. The stuff they find from their sources into their final essay. So it lets them kind of build the paper at a slower pace, which a lot of them seem to really like.
Yeah.
So this is the assignment sheet that I give them for the reflection. The reflections are usually quite interesting.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So this is Michelle again. I'm just wondering, have you found any of your students have been exposed to this type of way of delivering this, like a scaffolded assignment? Have they had any experience, do you think, with this, like maybe in high school or?
The vast majority of my students say that they don't have it to this degree.
Okay.
Some of them have done scaffolding, but they told me that typically it's like 2 or maybe 3 parts. This assignment has 6, and then the other assignment I do in this class is a podcast project, which is also like 7 weeks long. And that has like 10 different parts to it or something, you know? So they've done it a little, but not this much. So they seem to kind of like this because the low stakes assignments make the whole thing like a little bit more manageable for them to deal with.
Less intimidating.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Does anybody have any other questions or anything?
No, I just enjoyed working with your class and doing this assignment, Stephanie.
Thank you, Karen. It's always fun having you. So like Karen typically like will go and spend a couple of days in the library. And Karen will spend the first day kind of showing my students where they can like work on finding these good sources. And then the second day, we really just give them like an in-class work day so that they can work on finding sources that they need for their individual characters, because everybody's got somebody different. Everybody picks a different character. So the second day is kind of like an in-class work day where Karen and I just kind of wander around, you know, and like help them because they have all kinds of questions, you know, as they're looking for their stuff. Yeah.
So, well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you guys.
So,
I don't know. Christy, I don't know if I can hear you. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can't hear you. Your headset.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Wait, now I can't hear you. Oh. Can you talk, Stephanie?
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Okay.
I don't know why it stopped working. I started talking and then, yeah, anyway. Thank you again. This was really, really interesting. And I vaguely remember this from one of my high school classes. So it came back to me as soon as I started hearing more. And I love this way of doing it because it does give it that digestible sort of feel where you're not overwhelmed at all. And I had said, but no one could hear me, that even in life and in jobs, it kind of teaches them to really break up a thing and make it easier that way too. So, but thank you. Is there any way that we could have some of those templates and
absolutely
share them with people?
Yeah, absolutely. What would be the best way for me to do that? Just like via email, or is there another way for me to put that?
If you have if you want to like make a Google Drive folder and then I could share it in our high school to college folder.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll throw like all of the assignment sheets in there for the whole project so that you can see all of that.
Great. That would be excellent. I think
Yeah,
that would
absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone, and I hope to meet you at the thing next month. And Karen as well, maybe, possibly. And Michelle, of course.
Yes, I'll be there.
Okay. Well, thanks again, and I'll put this recording up on our YouTube channel as well.
Okay.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.
Yeah,
Bye.
you too. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.